Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Very good day to you and welcome to another edition of Life Matters because every life does matter. We thank you so much for interacting with us during the show, and we'd love to still continue hearing from you. So please do so via our WhatsApp line. We've got a social media page as well as our email address. Just send us some nice long emails to tell us why life really does matter to you. And we will try and squeeze it into our show, inshallah. We love how you make the show, so tell us what you want to speak about or what you'd like to hear about. So today we focus on child trauma. There's currently war-torn conflict happening around us. We see this all the time. We need to understand some of the physiological and psychological effects of a child trauma, like the bombings, like the shootings, like the killings we are exposed to. War was never as exposed to us as it is today. So today, to unpack this topic, and a specialist in childhood trauma, as well as child activist and clinical director of the Teddy Bear Foundation, is none other than Dr. Shaheda Omar. She joins us online. Assalamu alaikum to you, Dr. Shaheda.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran Dalilan for this opportunity.
So there's so much happening. We did speak about a little bit about, how this does affect. I spoke to a social worker earlier this week as well, and sort of to understand, what's really happening as parents and how we can handle it. But what is truly unveiling when it does come to some of the psychological and physiological, trauma that's happening within us. So please, why would you say, and if we could just quickly understand, a topic like this is so important for us to understand childhood trauma, and in the light of the conflict that we see every day, this Palestinian and Israel thing is not just affecting us, our children are exposed to it. So while our children and our families are witnessing it, why is a topic like this so important to discuss, even though you might not think your child could be suffering from childhood trauma?
So, a very important question, Hawa, because we know there's direct victims of violence and indirect victims of violence. And one cannot gloss over the fact that people that are exposed to it, children, adults, are not affected by it. It certainly impacts on the neural impulses, it impacts on the body, and we start seeing manifestations of that impact on people's engagement, interaction, interpersonal relationships, and also the behaviors or behavioral disorders that children start manifesting. And remember, we need to extend this to the outside community, because we would take it for granted that the direct victims are certainly going to show signs of being affected negatively and how it would impact on their trajectory. And the one thing that we often fail to recognize is that children outside of those war-torn zones are also affected, and it could impact on their well-being. It could affect their mental health. And I think that is something that one needs to focus on. One needs to be aware of to ensure that children's safety, children's security is promoted at all times.
So, what are the typical symptoms and manifestations that does get exposed, the physical reactions of children that may exhibit when they're experiencing abuse or witnessing traumatic events like the bombing and the violence? What are they?
So there are numerous, one looks at physical indicators, one looks at psychological indicators, and of course the emotional will fall under the psychological as well. So the physical indicators where we actually see children acting out. So sometimes children becoming aggressive, children becoming non-responsive, withdrawing, isolating themselves, or sometimes a drastic change in their personality or mood levels. A child who previously was lively, robust, suddenly becomes very quiet, silent, refuses to participate in activities that they previously engaged or enjoyed, but also looking at children that are within the educational institutions where it may affect their performance. where the grades may plummet or the attention span, as I mentioned, has decreased and they're not able to perform like they have previously. So there are numerous signs that one needs to look out for. But if we look at the psychological indicators, and those are a little bit more difficult, not always visible to the naked eye, one needs to look out again, as I said, mood swings where the person becomes overly weepy, or the responses are so short and sharp, which is not in line with the character or personality of the child. But things that you cannot always see is when children start engaging in self-destructive, self-behavioral manifestations. And what are those? Those kind of behaviors where sometimes children resort to drugs and alcohol to numb their pain. They see that as a means of solving their problems. Sometimes self-cutting. So cutting, using something, sharp objects to cut just to allow the pain to be released or to actually see that there's blood coming out. Or also, it's a cry out for help where they feel people around them cannot see what they're dealing with and they want to release that so that they can get some kind of response. And I think these are things that one needs to be also cautious about, but also understand sleeping patterns where there might be suddenly bouts of insomnia or sleeping a lot, eating patterns where in states of depression, where children overeat, filling that hole in the heart because they cannot explain what they're feeling. That pain is so deep, and food being the primary nurturer, they feel that's a way of taking back some sense of power and control. So eating a lot, or sometimes losing the appetite completely. So, and these are some of the psychological manifestations as well that is not always immediately identifiable. So one needs to look at it in context and not look at one symptom in isolation, but look at a cluster of symptoms and then obviously look out for professional help. I think that is important as a parent, as a caregiver, as a foster guardian, that one needs to reach out for professional help to address the mental health and mental well-being of the child.
Dr. Shaheda, can you expound on the immediate physical responses of the body when it comes to the ongoing stress and the ongoing trauma that children might experience? Something that we can immediately pick up if there is something that they've just witnessed, like they saw a WhatsApp video and you looking at it and they said, "Mommy, what are you looking at?" And they quickly see a glimpse of something. What is the quick response that you can be warned to say, "Listen, this is not appropriate for my child"?
So, what we see is children go into that fright, flight, or freeze mode, that state of dysregulation, the shock of seeing what they've been exposed to. So you would find that the child is sort of in that freeze mode. They cannot move. They're in a catatonic state. Or they're shivering, the trembling that you would see. Again, that's all about the disbelief, the terror that they are experiencing. And I think those are key indicators that caregivers need to be aware of, that this child is now in that state where the child needs to be immediately contained and supported.
Can you explain the connection between the physical health, and you've mentioned psychological treatment that needs to be sought when it's needed, that connection, the well-being of the physical and the psychological well-being in children who has experienced, a traumatic event. So when that does happen, they see that glimpse, they react in a certain way. What psychological, maybe help or reaction you should give to your child?
So firstly, I think I just want to elaborate on the physical manifestations. What we as parents would or caregivers would see is suddenly bouts of stomach aches, headaches, suddenly there'd be pain on different parts of the body. the somatic complaints that are expressed or articulated, one must not dismiss that, because despite the fact that there may not be a medical diagnosis to explain that, that is also an underlying cause for concern, that this child is suffering trauma, that this child is in a state of dysregulation and requires medical intervention and psychological support. I think just to respond to that, it's very important for parents to be aware of it, that this child is just being difficult or being obnoxious, doesn't want to go to school, doesn't want to partake in things that are expected of the child. I just want to alert parents to that they need to be aware of it, that there's a reason for this kind of manifestation, and we must not dismiss it. Howard, then coming back to your question about parents, I think it is important that parents are aware and that they need to look at containment to reassure the child. When I talk about containment, it's not just the expression of words, but it's the physical holding of their child to actually, maintain eye contact, be at the level of the child, and physically assert some level of firmness, holding and grasping and clutching the child around their body to show that I'm here with you. So the support, the comfort, and say, we'll go through this together and we'll get through this together. So it's security, comfort, support, but also instilling a sense of hope. It's important for children to get that kind of response and feedback from somebody that is close to them, their significant other, to respond in that calm, contained manner. Just switching off the television or switching off any news bulletin is not the answer. Yes, ideally, we should actually prevent children from being repeatedly exposed, but also talk about it, but talk about it in an age-appropriate manner so that the child does not become more overwhelmed and feel out of their depth and feel that there's no reason to live.
Absolutely. Wow. Some hectic information that we need to consider when we are exposing our children to the war-torn conflict that's happening out currently in the Middle East, and to understand, what their reaction is like, what we need to do, how do we need to respond, and what support there needs to be for our children and for us as well. But we talk more after the short break with Dr. Shaheda Omar, Clinical Director at the Teddy Bear Foundation, an organization that's there for children suffering from trauma and any hard-hit abuse as well. But we'll talk more. Stay with us. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Assalamu alaikum. A very good day to you wherever you are. Good morning, good night. If you're listening to us across the lands and over the beautiful seas, you are doing so on the World Wide Web as well as our YouTube channel. Remember, you can do it on www.hilaal.tv as well as Hilaal TV Life Matters. Catch up on any of our shows that you have missed as we expound on the topic of how life actually does matter. So today we're unpacking childhood trauma, and currently we as parents, but more affectedly sometimes our children, see and are exposed to the war-torn images, videos, even interviews. I mean, I was listening to an interview the other day, and my daughter was asking me, "Mommy, why are they saying these things? Why are other Muslims, dying?" And so we need to try and educate ourselves and learn how to cope with this current situation that is happening. I have online with me a child trauma activist and clinical director for Teddy Bear Foundation, an organization that stands up for children in trauma and affected with any type of abuse and support that is needed in their situation. So that is Dr. Shaheda Omar. She's on the other side, and we're chatting about some of the effects and how parents can react to children being affected or being exposed to this. So, Dr. Shaheda, if we can sort of look at any of the potential long-term physical effects that the body can be affected with when children are exposed to such traumatic events like the bombing or the killing, and how exactly does this manifest over time if you're looking at it long term?
So if you're looking at the physical effects, I think we cannot dismiss the importance of those physical effects because, children are going to, we know that adults have difficulty in articulating their anxieties, their fears. For children, we might find suddenly the manifestations might be sleeping disturbances where they have recurrent nightmares. They see these monsters or gremlins coming after them. And I think it's something to take serious. Sometimes children will also be fearful if they've seen an image of a specific adult, and there might be adults that may resemble the adult that they saw, the adults that they saw committing the violence, the fear of or avoidance of coming into contact with those individuals, or even a setting that they may feel reminds them of what they've seen on a news bulletin or on a printed news article. I think one needs to be aware of that. And what I'm referring to is that one would also see, so particularly looking at when there's cumulative stress over a period of time, it's going to translate into toxic stress where it starts affecting the different parts of the body. And, you talk about physical effects. So if we look at the different parts of the body, so looking at bowel control, bladder control, so when, it's symbolic or metaphoric of loss of control, where the child feels totally powerless. And as a result, you would suddenly find that it's not age appropriate. There's enuresis or encopresis. Those are physical effects, and one needs to look at that quite seriously. Yes, medical intervention is necessary for a clear and accurate diagnosis, but also the way forward on the plan of action on managing that. And I think these are symptoms that parents also need to be aware of. That, you see an 8 or 9-year-old now suddenly being regressing to a former state of development when they've been, toilet trained, they've gone through the motions, through the different life cycle, and now this child is manifesting this kind of behavior. It definitely requires medical intervention, and even more than that, sometimes the psychological support.
Can you tie, a traumatic event that a child's been exposed to at a younger age to maybe, like reactions of a teenager, for instance, that they're acting out for some reason and you just don't know why because things are just going perfect. Can you tie that to, or do you need some intervention or help or support to direct you? And this child's actually reacting after so many years of something that had happened to them, previously.
So, how you raise something very important. We need to realize that on a daily basis, one is exposed to or bombarded with so many different images, and so visual images, auditory, other sensory modalities, which could actually trigger past traumatic experiences. And of course, one would not be in a position to explain the sudden outburst or outrage or sudden manifestation of the inappropriate or concerning behavior. So something that happened in one's childhood as a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old, and now one is 15, 16 or 17, and suddenly there's this different manifestation coming out, but it obviously has not been dealt with, or it's been triggered. When we look at post-traumatic stress disorder, and I spoke about toxic stress, when the teenager would suddenly this is their way of coping by releasing it in this way. It's not in an adaptive or orderly manner. It's a maladaptive behavioral mechanism. It's their way of trying to resolve what is going on internally. And I think that is something that needs to be addressed and needs to be looked at closely with the necessary support. It's easy, to label a child, to say that this child is, showing oppositional defiant disorder or conduct disorder, and with your older, with the adolescents, to say antisocial personality disorder, where they become unruly, uncontrollable. There's theft, there's truancy, there's lies, there's deceit, all sorts of not going to school. I think those are things that one needs to also explore at great length before it is misdiagnosed or misunderstood.
So, something that comes up for me that I've read, and it often says when a child acts badly, they are feeling badly. So, first go to that feeling of that child, that they're feeling awful, they're feeling terrible, instead of saying, oh, no, this child is just naughty and they're acting badly. But it comes from a feeling. So, if us as parents can remember that. So if I can look at now the strategies and interventions that we can apply in, within our child's daily routine, or a specific therapy session that they maybe need to see to when it does come to them coping with that physical manifestations of trauma, and how that can be integrated into therapy and a support system.
And how you've touched on something so critical when we look at children, regardless of their age. As caregivers, we have a responsibility to ensure that they have a routine in their life, that there's limit setting, there's healthy boundaries. And children are creatures of habit. They will test the waters, but I think knowing fully well that knowing what to expect, the level or the element of predictability. So there are very clear expectations on both sides, from the caregiver and of the child. And I think that is something that's key in every relationship, in every family, that there needs to be this routine, consistency, communication, which is certainly key.
I want to look at any age differences or gender specific differences in how children physically respond to trauma, and how should this influence our approach when it does come to some sort of intervention or treatment and support.
So if we look at the global statistics, Gouwah, we know that as we speak, and I mean, it's a very sad thing to be speaking about, that more than 420 million children are subjected to the war-torn conflicts, and that children are traumatized as a result of that. And if we look at the gender differences, that, more frequently girls are subjected to additional trauma than boys. And again, if we look at war-torn countries where girls are subjected to, well, not subjected, I think there's a lack of opportunities, because we know with war, children face multiple losses. So the loss not only of family, of basic rights such as food and shelter, education, the right to water, the right to health care, but we find that children are not in a place of protection. And if we look at girls and boys, girls are more or at a greater risk of being abused. And I think that's something that we must not dismiss or discount. That, even within the humanitarian settings, it's been found with global studies that girls are more often victimized emotionally and sexually, and even the fact that girls drop out of school, so their opportunities for pursuing an education is actually comes to a disrupted, or it's ended. There's no opportunities. But girls, if we look at child marriages, the sexual abuse. It's obviously more common amongst girls. But coming back to the local context where we are remotely affected by this, I think both genders are affected by it, but boys are less expressive in the articulation of how they've been traumatized. Girls would be, it's more acceptable for girls to share and articulate what they're feeling, but boys, it's this prescriptive stereotype role that is expected, that they need to be more macho, they need to show courage, they need to show, well, it's not courage or strength. I think the strength lies in actually expressing what one is feeling, and it's not to be seen as a weakness, but it's actually a strength to say, I'm not okay. That is okay to say, I'm not okay, but we find that it's more acceptable for girls to say that, but not acceptable for boys. And I think that's where we need to be also very aware of the different responses in the genders.
Okay. So just after this break, we're going to take a quick break. I want to play a short video of a journalist who was affected as a child and talking specifically about girls and just the response to that video. But stay with us as we unpack childhood trauma unveiled, looking at the current war-torn conflict and what our children is exposed to, what we need to educate ourselves on and our responses. But more just after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. We're talking about childhood trauma in the current war-torn conflict and what our children are exposed to so that we can understand what they are going through when they see this. How do we react? How do we support them? And what interventions needs to be taken into consideration. Before we continue our interview with Dr. Shaheda Omar, Clinical Director at the Teddy Bear Foundation, who does some enormous and heartfelt work to kids with trauma in our country in South Africa. I want to play just a short interview that was done on Sky News, and thank you so much to them for this footage, of a journalist who was exposed to trauma in Palestine when she was younger and her reaction to that. So just take a look at this.
When Hamas launched the attack on Israel, as a Palestinian, what did you expect would happen next?
Well, I think, again, I'm sorry, but I think this is misleading because you can't water down what's been happening about the attack on the 7th of October. Let's talk about 2014. Let's talk about 2021. Let's talk about all the aggressions, Palestinians in Gaza. Me personally, let's not talk about Palestinians in Gaza. I've lived through 4 horrible aggressions. That's actually why I left Gaza in the first place. I saw people getting cut into pieces in front of my eyes when I was 14 years old. I spent the last 7 years trying to get therapy to get over my PTSD, my traumatic experience of just living there. So this is, again, you're misleading by saying it's a Hamas attack. You need to say what's been happening. We can't look at it just by looking at what's happened on the 7th of October. Why are you not talking about all of the other attacks on worshippers in Al-Aqsa Mosque, on, kidnapping women and raping them in Israeli jails, all these Palestinians who are being killed in the West Bank? Why are you not asking me about them? Hamas does not operate there.
So just looking at that response, Dr. Shaheda, this is years of trauma that the Palestinian children are also facing. And our children actually asked us about this. I was confronted with this watching a short documentary as well. What do we respond to our kids when they hear about children that are facing trauma and haven't necessarily even gotten the therapy? This young lady who's a journalist left Gaza for that reason because of her trauma, still suffering from PTSD. Just take us through your thoughts and comments about this video.
So I think what's important to understand is that we need to talk to children. Of course, we have to ensure that we are able to firstly hold them in the space. They need to know that you love them, that you are there for them, and that you are going to, no matter whatever happens, that you are going to be together and go through this together, because children are affected by this. Their fears are compounded because they feel they are, are they next in line? Is this going to happen to them as well, to their families? This constant fear of what if this happens to us? Will I lose my parent? Will I get hurt? Will I get injured? So I think it's, again, using age-appropriate language with little children. We're going to play games, get them engaged in activities and household chores, because they, just talking to them is not sufficient, but holding them in that space and reassuring them. You cannot guarantee anything. I think that's important to also say, but we don't know what happens tomorrow. We know that the sun goes down, the sun comes up the next day, and that we are together and we will be together, and that unconditional love and support is provided. I think that's the important thing, because there is no guarantee for any person or any family, but to say that things change every day for everybody. It's something that we cannot speak to, but we are here for each other and we will give support to each other.
So let's look at children that don't necessarily communicate effectively. You've used that instance in just an outright situation to immediately react. But what if we, get misleading signs from kids that don't express the manifestations and the symptoms that you spoke about earlier on? How do we effectively respond, just, out of our own or not, even when it comes to children that are not communicating effectively, when they are showing physical manifestations, but then you check in with them, they're okay, they're all right. So it's about not communicating effectively and you get the wrong signs.
So how are you saying something so important? I think it's so relevant and applicable to each and every one of us. The important thing is to open that platform of communication, giving permission and saying that I feel so hurt. My heart is so sore. That I know, I shiver and I tremble when I see what is going on. How did you feel? Because this is how I felt. But I feel that when we are together, we draw strength from each other and we give strength to each other. I think by engaging in that kind of communication, so the child does not see it as a closed platform, but an open platform, to say that if I feel like that, it's okay, it's acceptable, and it's normal to feel like that. Even my caregiver, my parent, my significant other has shared that, and they've also expressed how we can give support to each other, and that it's a source of strength for each and every one of us. So I think that is important, to shy away from it, to pretend like it's not there, or and we think that we are brave and courageous by not shedding a tear. I think it's okay, as long as it's not exaggerated, where the child feels overwhelmed and the child suddenly has to assume the role of, or become a pseudo-adult. I think, to be real, to be authentic, I think that's important. But don't exaggerate it or give it so much prominence where the child feels that actually there's no hope here. We need to instill the sense of hope, and that, look, we're doing this, we're cooking this. So there's always something positive that one brings into it.
Let's look at PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. She mentioned it and developed it as an adult, but experienced the event as a child. So can you provide some insights into the connection between the physiological manifestations of trauma, especially when children that has suffered from PTSD, and also you've mentioned earlier on some of the development that does occur. So let's maybe touch on the connection between the development conditions of post-traumatic stress, if it does occur in children.
So we need to firstly unpack what is post-traumatic stress disorder. Now we know when children have been exposed to stress, and in this case we can see it's cumulative stress. So it's post-trauma stress disorder. And children, what we see, this hyper-arousal or hyper-vigilance, the startled responses, and hyper-vigilance. So on the lookout always, as if waiting for the next explosion, for the next victim. It's always on the lookout. So that being on high alert, I think that's important to realize. And then also the intrusive symptoms. So what are the intrusive symptoms? Recurrent flashbacks or recurrent nightmares, those haunting images that keep on coming into one's face, into one's space. And then avoidance of settings that may remind one of what has happened, avoidance of individuals that resemble. So that's what post-traumatic stress disorder is. And as this journalist, reflected her experiences as a child and even now as an adult, the vicarious trauma, because she relives what she had been subjected to and exposed to. And I think that is just to understand how it actually affects individuals if it hasn't been dealt with and addressed, and if there hasn't been ongoing intervention in terms of psychological support. One could really be very disturbed, and it could result in many other manifestations and other behavioral disorders and even the mood disorders that people are often plagued by.
Okay, so I want to unpack a little bit more on the video and talk about her cumulative stress, and if that does occur and something that you've picked up, or even find yourself in that situation, and maybe your child could be in that, how we can help ourselves and our children. And remember that we are the adults, we are the ones in charge, and we role play so that they can see, and not just role play, but what's happening in real life. And they will see from how our reaction is for them to handle a stressful situation. So let us be the leaders in a good way. We'll talk more with Dr. Shaheda just after this. Please don't go anywhere. Welcome back, Assalamu alaikum, and a very good day to you. Thank you so much for staying with us as we unpack this very pertinent topic, childhood trauma and current child trauma happening around us. Just as people of our own faith, of our own belief, our children are exposed to losing their families, losing entire generations, losing their homes. And Dr. Shaheda unpacked some of the symptoms that does come up: fear, anxiety, and the manifestations of negative media and our responses. But as parents, as I said earlier on, we need to respond appropriately. We need to expose our children appropriately, and we need to keep them safe. Above all, keep them safe and protect them. Very, very important point that I took out of all of this is hold them, have that interaction with them, that eye contact, even if they don't respond, have that interaction with them. We are, like I said earlier, we are the leaders on how they need to respond. So we need to respond appropriately. Our conversation continues with a clinical director at the Teddy Bear Foundation, Dr. Shaheda Omar. And I just want to unpack a little bit more in the video, because I had heard conversations about that specific videos, and videos like that, where, there are individuals out there that speak about the trauma, and she so vividly, expressed, why don't you talk about this? Why? So is that also part of therapy when you are exposed to a trauma in your past life and you find that people are actually suppressing that information, people are not making it as important or relevant? Let's talk about that in the context, Dr. Shaheda.
So thank you for that, Gouwah. I think one needs to also understand, if we're just reflecting on the journalist's response, when a person is in a state of crisis, what do you actually do? You will repeatedly tell the story to all and sundry. You will be indiscreet, indiscriminate, because of the nature of the crisis, feeling totally helpless, feeling, out of control, and reaching out to anyone within one's vicinity. But we also find that by not speaking out, and I think that's something that you have highlighted here of great importance, that we as viewers, who are outside of that war-torn conflict, watching the horrific scenes of plundering, brutalization, the mortality rates going up by the minute, seeing innocent, vulnerable populations being decimated, it impacts not only physically, but even on the neural pathways, the neural impulses, the synaptic nerves, because the cortisol levels start escalating, the catecholamines. We find that as a result, if we just look at how it affects us, of course, we've talked about post-traumatic stress disorder, and sometimes the immediate response is denial, not to talk about it. But the important thing here is actually finding a safe and open platform. Talking to all adults out there, please, it's important to de-stress, to actually de-roll yourself from that setting and to express your feelings and just talk in a safe space, of course, to somebody you trust, you believe in, that you feel you can share with. And likewise, it needs to be a mutual reciprocal process that the person can also express himself or herself. Because if we keep these pent up emotions, we're going to find that we are going to express it in ways which we have no control. We might become irritable, aggressive, say the wrong things, act out inappropriately, because vicarious trauma is real. And we cannot remove ourselves from that pain and trauma because we are human. We experience, like you said, it's about the feelings, and the feelings are not untouched. It certainly leaves an imprint on that. And we find that, of course, the actions that follow thereafter us is something that one will not always recognize or even expect, or is not always acceptable.
Let's still stay on therapy. What about early intervention and early intervention and therapy? Does that play a role in addressing the physical and psychological trauma that is impacted on children?
So it's not only early intervention. I think we need to look at prevention, early intervention, and intervention, to look at all three pillars, because all three pillars are necessary. Of course, intervention is in that reactive mode, which one has to respond to the pressing need, demand, or crisis on the ground. But prevention is, it's reassuring, before children or individuals feel helpless, or this frustration, this anger, this deep sadness, before it turns into depression. One needs to speak to that. But an early intervention, once you start seeing something, to immediately respond and to get the kind of help that is necessary to actually address that wound, that psychological wound, that emotional wound, that you need the help and the support of somebody that's equipped, enlightened, a mental health professional, to assist and support the person before it becomes a full-blown reactive response.
So you've mentioned some of the physical health concerns that does occur, the bedwetting, the maybe some pain, eating disorders, even sleeping disturbances. How can we as parents support our children or children in this addressing this this issue and be supportive in a way?
So, of course, I think I forgot to mention was the panic disorders, where suddenly you would find this severe chest pain or choking or cannot breathe, gasping for air. And those are things that one needs to look out for as well. And you've raised the issue of how can we as parents support our children. I think, as we've discussed earlier, that being emotionally available, not just physically available, but extending that emotional availability, that I am here for you no matter what. And when you open these conversations, you're giving permission. So the child or the teenager will know that I can actually come forward. This is a person I trust, I feel safe with, and I don't have to pretend to be something else. I don't have to mask my fears, my anxieties, and I think that would be ideal, that we engage in this kind of communication consistently, not just like yesterday or today or tomorrow, but every day. I think use the family time routines, whether it's breakfast, whether it's lunch, at nighttime, when it's, whether it's salah time, to engage in prayer, to make those du'as and engage children with that, to reinforce this strength and power of the divine being, because I think religion plays such a crucial role.
Absolutely.
And I think that is something we must not discount or dismiss, the power of the spiritual presence, the power of the higher order, and our supreme creator. I think that certainly would make children feel more supported and more secure.
Absolutely. We have to wrap up, Dr. Shaheda. Leave us with some maybe contact details, some references us as parents can latch onto for support, and also just elaborate how families, schools, neighbors, communities can support these children.
Well, I think importantly, firstly, we must not dismiss the pain, the trauma that the children are faced with in this war-torn situation. They are innocent and they have no control over the situation. So let's try and reach out in whatever way possible we can. Even in our small spaces, we need to do that. But we need to continuously talk about it to our children, to our friends, and look at ways of how we can support each other as well. I think this is a very challenging era in the history of the Muslim Ummah, and I think we really need to be available emotionally, physically, and any other way that we can provide support. So let's have continuous engagement and communication around the subject, not to just, find that people are terrorized or are suffering more trauma. We don't want to inflict trauma, but we want to ensure that more people feel supported, because united we stand. And I think the more we collectively engage and support each other, the better and more contained we will feel.
Jazakallah khair. Shukran so much in this unprecedented times. We've seen COVID, now we see war. And we want to support each other in every way, especially our children who we need to protect. Dr. Shaheda Omar from the Teddy Bear Foundation, was absolute pleasure chatting to you, and thank you again for elaborating on this topic. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
There we have it. Hope the information that we shared had been some help to you. And please don't forget to reach out to us if you need help, if you are in a traumatic situation, if you don't quite know how to handle, send us an email and connect with us via our social media pages, and we'll give you the necessary references that will assist you to get through any hard times that you are going through. This is Life Matters from myself, Gouwah Solomon. Stay tuned for our next show as we unpack how adults can be assisted when it does come to physical and emotional situations that they need to unpack when it comes to trauma. Some of them are not sleeping. People are sending us messages to say, how do they cope? So we'll unpack some support for the adults with our psychologist, Mahir. But for myself, Gouwah Solomon, wassalamu alaikum and goodbye for now.